A tutti, benvenuti alla ripresa dei lavori.
Good afternoon to everybody and welcome back to our afternoon session, which is dedicated to trade associations and gender. We will have two speeches, Bellavitis, Corine Maitte, and Isabel Drumond Braga. So let's start with the first speech with then Bellavitis. So women and trade crafts in Venice and Florence. Thank you. Thank you for accepting our proposals. Well, we haven't had so many speeches about gender, so here we are. So let's start with Firenze, with the case of Florence, since we are in Prato, and so closer to Florence than Venice. So the relationship, the complex relationship between women and trade guilds has been the subject of significant research, at least for the modern era, beginning with the model of the decline of women's participation in organized activities, a model that has its roots in the world of Alice Clark, and which was subsequently developed for the German-speaking world by Martha Howell, Mary Wiesner, and Sheila Ogilvy. Initially, it was research on Italy that disproved this model, particularly the cases of Udine, Bologna, and Rome, which demonstrated how female workers, despite the injunctions of the guilds, in many cases chose to remain outside them. The same behavior was noted by Claire Croston regarding Parisian seamstresses in the late 17th century. So the case of Udine actually dates back to the week of women in economy here at the Datini Weeks here in Prato, which is an important reference. Women's work outside the arts competed with organized labor, which, however, necessarily involved the contribution of piece workers dependent on masters, often through also women masters, often through the intermediation of female masters who were themselves outside the guild. Furthermore, the French case, where entirely female trade guilds have existed since the Middle Ages and where now female guilds were founded in the late 17th century, contradicts the model of decline. In other contexts, too, Warsaw, Madrid, women's guilds existed, particularly in the retail trade. Finally, in the last decades of the 18th century, against a backdrop of crisis in the guild model, but we could discuss about it, there was a noticeable trend towards greater openness towards female workers. According to the classification proposed by Ariane Smith and subsequently adopted by Sheila Ogilvy, 5 different models are said to have existed in Europe during 15th to 18th centuries, the first of which reflects the highest degree of female agency and the fifth the lowest. Guilds formed and run exclusively by women, mixed guilds with theoretical equal access to various levels, excluding, however, positions of governance. 3, guilds that do not accept women as independent members but recognize the right of widows to continue their husband's work. 4, guilds to which women may only gain access as apprentices or wage earners. 5th, the last one, guilds that exclude any female participation. In the case of Italy, where entirely female guilds never existed, Sheila Ogilvy presents the following data. 35 mixed guilds, so 3.51% of the 998 examined. So these are macro data on the long-term period, so we need to do further researches more in-depth in specific cases. So this research is being carried out within the frameworks of the ANRDEFE program, Droit, Économie, Femmes, Italie, Gender and Agency in Venice, Florence, Naples, Palermo, 16th, 18th century, which aims to re-examine in a comparative manner the economic activities of women in 4 capitals of wealthy Italian states during the modern era. Now, I leave the floor to Corine for the Florence case. Well, yes. So we divided our presentation. At first, we actually thought we would divide the presentation per themes, topics, but then we divided the two cities. So I'm going to start with Florence. So as already said, this work is still in progress. So I will be glad also to receive your comments, your remarks, also because this is a first draft which needs to be confirmed or not. So just to start, well, I have to say I limited the research to the textile guild as mentioned. So as I will remember, I will then analyze the presence of women in the statutes of the main three trades, wool trade, silk trade, and linen trade. But let's see if I will have enough time or not. So the first aspect, a massive female presence in the textile sector. So this topic has already been studied for Brown and Goodman, so concerning wool production process, wool making guilds, and also silk making guilds. So, and I'm quoting here the census of 1767, studied by Alessandra Contini and Francesco Martelli, when these documents have been found in the state archives. So then I found other material, and so I studied it. So we can see from this census that exactly the presence of women in several manufacturers is massive. So if you have a look at the graph on the right, you see that these are mainly the textile manufacturers and all the sector of clothing. Here we see again an important presence of women. Again, on this graph, I represented the presence of women in Florence's manufacturers. So here we have all the cases in which women work in the business activity, also as wives. And here we have an enormous importance of silk industry, representing 56% of women's occupation, where women represent 85% of labor of silk industry, labor at those times. Of course, we also have men working in this industry, but mostly there are women working there. So it is very interesting to look at the census of the late 18th century, because we see that in in weaving sector, we see an evolution. And this evolution shows that men particularly disappear in the end, where we have, if you look at the far right, you see that then almost all the workers were females. This is also for seamstresses, stocking knitters, tailors.
Insomma, e dunque la presenza è massiccia. Dunque,
So again, women's presence is massive. Second point.
Gli statuti delle guild. Ovviamente parlo qui.
So that was also the case in headgears. But let's see the women's presence in guild statutes. So we have printed statutes you know, dating back from those times. And then we have the statutes of the modern era. So, and I looked at these statutes where I found data about women's presence. So concerning silk industry, silk manufacturing industry, already in the statute dating back to 1317, so these published medieval statutes mention the presence of both male and female workers as weavers, as combers. So concerning wool processing, wool production, in the statute we find quotations about the presence of women. So we can find statutes from back to 1500 and further updates until mid-17th century. What is very interesting in my opinion is concerning the fact that this has also something to do with dowries and assets which have their origin in marriages. So as we were saying at the very beginning, so silk cannot belong to the first 5 main categories because, well, it does not include women officially, it does not exclude them, but simply doesn't talk about them. So therefore, I started to study this industry. So as for the Silk Guild, the 1335 statutes do not appear to mention the presence of women, which, however, are present in the reform of the 1351, where we find witnesses about texitor seu texitrix, so weavers, male and women weavers. So this is activity which is recognized in the statutes. So, and I was asking to the colleagues, experts to Middle Ages, I asked them if there was some relationship between the demographic collapse due to the Black Death. So this expression is repeated in successive statutes, which I'm not going into detail of. But it's interesting to see the quotation of 1411, where there's which is about dyers and fullers, weavers. So, and where we have a kind of invitation of all the people, male and women, to take part of the guild, to enter the guild. So somehow women did not want to enter the guild. What changes with modern age? Well, I studied the 1580 statute, which implies a whole renewal of the statute, and here we find a lot of information. For example, in 1481, it is written that fathers, husbands, and sons are held responsible for the action of the women in the family. But also in many other deeds, we find that the presence of women is taken into consideration. So even though they are not punished the same way as men, they are punished. So as regard penalties for offenses, every effort is made to ensure that women are punished, not in the same way as men, but just as severely. So this would indicate that the drafters of the statute were already fully aware of women's role, that they did not oppose it, but provided for matters accordingly on a legal level, on a juridical level. Then all professions and activities are, as it is traditional, referred to in the masculine form. But yet the statute also attests to the presence of women, particularly in weaving, where we can find master or mistress of the weaving trade. So the two roles of the two genders are placed on an equal footing. It is therefore stipulated that apprentices may not leave them without notice, but also that both masters and mistresses are held accountable for the errors of their subordinates. So the statute attests in other places that women may be master, worker, apprentice, or foreman, or worker. So we can find in several statutes the confirmation that both men and women were taken account for. So the drafters of the statute, therefore, have no difficulty, we can state it, in considering women in any role and at various stages of the silk weaving trade. Some roles are undoubtedly already sufficiently feminized for these activities to be systematically referred to in both masculine and feminine forms. So there was let's say that both man and female weavers, for example, who in the future wish to practice the craft of women weaving fabrics using this technique, it is said, it is quoted in this document, whether as master of weavers or mistress weavers, they must present themselves within a month before the Chamberlain of the Guild to take an oath to the statute and pay a special registration fee. This is a very interesting clause. So they also, it shows that they could manage looms, that they could have workers. So this recognizes also their potential in arts and in creativity. And it says then, and since it may happen that some weaver, man or woman, might invent some new method of work, so this is also taken into account. And then we have also the list of all the prices to be paid for the different processing, for the different products and service. This could also be, we could do a cross-check with the data from the companies. So maybe I have seen that two women were given the cheaper cloths with respect to women. So women got not the most expensive ones. Women are present also are strikingly also. They are also present in the data concerning the borders of the city. So, and also in cutting and weaving gold, cutting and spinning gold. These are also mentioned in the statute I'm describing. So, a comparison between the statutes of the Wool Guild and those of the Silk Guild thus reveals two rather distinct regulatory approaches. Whilst the former renders the presence of women entirely invisible, the latter explicitly acknowledges it in most of the essential stages of the trade. So it is fully recognized in the second industry. So women's presence is attested and confirmed. Concerning the linen industry and of cotton and hemp, these are even more umbrella trades, because they include also innkeepers and other businesses, other roles. and I will show it in detail in a while. This is also a not well-known industry in Florence, although it becomes more and more important at these times in 1767. So if we look at the reformation of the Statute of Linaiuoli of 1578, we find interesting description of women's presence, mainly as tailors. So this reveals this massive presence of women in this industry. So there was no prohibition. So it is therefore by no means a question of prohibiting them from practicing the trade, prohibition undoubtedly considered futile and counterproductive, but of making them pay a registration fee and subjecting them to the guild's regulation, as is indeed specified. So the legal incapacity of women necessitates specifying, as in the statutes of the Silk Guild, that in their case, fathers are always deemed liable for their unmarried daughters and husbands for their wives. And in the case of widows, they and their property are liable. So this means that they also could be subject to a decrease in price in some cases. So, and in terms of, in the context of disputes between tailors and their clients, women are present, and they were punished as and obliged to live in the ghetto. So this stays in the statute. So all this presupposes that women, just like their male counterparts, are permitted to run open-air shops. And finally, the statute also implicitly highlight and acknowledge the importance of women in the weekly linen markets held at the time. So women went to the market in San Lorenzo. They, of course, for example, women running businesses in San Lorenzo had to be subject to the same rules and regulations. So this is also shedding a light on women running businesses and the control over it. So the statutes also try to seek to regulate this business. So I think that the passing to the norm texts, they are not only tools, formal tools, but they evolve over time. So, and it is interesting to consider this evolution. So contrary to the traditional view that women were excluded from the guilds with the advent of modern era, these statutes demonstrate that even in the strongly patriarchal Florence, women could be integrated as potential full members of the workforce, even with the status of master, but without certain rights in the management of the arts or participation in social occasions. And this takes us back about Franco Franceschi said about Lucca in the medieval times. So the lists of apprenticeships and of membership, as I'm saying, as I have written in my article, which I do not have the time to describe in detail here, this is all described in my article. So, concerning Venice, well, for Venice, we do not have the same census as detailed as those from 1676, but it is talked about thousands of women in the business, in the guilds. So we have a prevalence in the textile sector here as well, in the clothing, and in other activities not belonging to other guilds. So the renter of the room rentner. So concerning the corporations, I decided to consult this source in the project financed by the Normandy region, which allowed us to access data about that region. So we started this work, which is still in progress. So we have 11 corporations, which is 1/10 of the corporations existing at those times. So the key word women is found in 71 occurrences concerning the centurieri, so the belt producer, the depintores, so the painters, the fiolieri or verrieri, so glassmakers, marzeri, mercers, passamaneri, manufacturers of trimmings, mainly in silk, specchieri, so mirror makers, varoteri, so furriers, and veluderi, weavers of silk velvet, so of which we have talked a lot in these days. So we do not see the presence of women in goldsmith guilds and the bag or leather bag makers guilds. So we can see there's a good variety of these guilds. So the rules in general are about widows, daughters, sometimes sisters, but also masters and apprentices. And these rules states that nobody cannot practice the business if not registered, and these are quite frequent about, again, all these rules. So sons, daughters, daughters, sisters, and masters. So the norms of weavers of silk velvet, well, here you have more details with respect to what I'm going to say. So these rules are quite attentive to the characteristics of their members, men and women. So no master can have cotton thread to be produced. Men and women have to pay the fee for the St. Peter's feast. No master, any master or mistress who takes on a person to work as a laborer, whether male or female, must record this. No master or mistress may teach the children of merchants. So the presence of women in silk industry is a constant factor, and it is well known almost everywhere. But we notice that we cannot see a differentiation between men and women. So we know that we know from several sources that women were active in the first phases of the production, at the loom, for example, as in Florence, but also as autonomous then worker at the loom. So in 1680, a rule allows only the women of the headmaster to work on the loom, but stating that there's no rule about it. In 1753, a survey, a census, reveals that many women work on the loom without being tied to master weavers, which prompted the Silk Guild to open up access to apprenticeship and the title of master weaver to women. There would therefore have been a period of 70 years during which women were no longer authorized to work on their own account, whereas before and after this, it seems to have been possible. In the case of painters, two interesting female specializations emerge, which is the gilders, doradore or doratrici in Italian, and here you see a rule from 1457 during a dispute over jurisdiction between painters and engravers. So there's a mention of all women and other persons who gild, whom women and other persons may gild and do as they have done in the past. And then it says illuminators. The other is illuminators. The children of illuminators, whether male or female, must be accepted into the guild without any apprenticeship before they will have learned from their fathers. So one could not practice the business if coming from families from other guilds, from other trades, actually. So in 1542, a guild regulation from 1537 that restricts the rights of widows and daughters were rejected by the 5 Savi sopra le regole. In the same year, a new regulation by the 5 Savi alla Mercanzia stipulated that the widows and daughters of master craftsmen who had remarried artisans not belonging to the guild could continue to work within the guild. So again, a ruling from 1542 limited the rights of widows and daughters. So that was by a rule by the Cinque Savi della Mercanzia, these five representatives. So it says that in those of the guild who were opposed to accepting the husbands into the guild, the women may work and employ others freely as masters of the guild of centurieri without any impediment and without paying a registration fee. So they can work and give work, so have workers as masters of the guild. In 1623, the Provveditori alla Giustizia Vecchia authorized widows to take on apprentices and to enjoy all the privileges of master craftsmen. The marzeri, so the grocers, the haberdashers guild was characterized by its openness to women and foreigners, and was the only one in which mention was made of the guild's brothers and sisters. Women appeared in 4 distinct categories, which sometimes overlapped: as master craftswomen, as a separate women's category, as apprentices, as street vendors. So they are part of the guild and appear in large numbers in the membership lists. For example, in 1586, there were 31 female masters, 366 male masters, and in a list of 305 apprentices, there were 122 women. Between 1586 and 1692, in the women category recorded in a separate register, comprised 25 members. In 1704, competition from itinerant haberdashers who would enter homes on the occasion of engagements and weddings prompted a request from the haberdashers to no longer admit women as masters nor as members. But the request was evidently not approved, given that we found at least 10 women who appear on the membership list, and they are not all widows. You have married women, and you have also women with no indication on their social and civil status. So this is, as I have been saying, a research which is still in progress. So the 4 registers of the Specchieri, 16th to 18th century, contain interesting information. Regulation from 1564, starting from the 1500 to the end of 1700. Again, here I found very interesting information. There's a regulation from 1564 saying that widows of master craftsmen authorize them to run a workshop for 6 months. And we have also an overlapping here of identities, because women are described as masters and as workers. So Again, I'm going back. I was saying in 1564 concerning this regulation concerning the widows of master craftsmen authorized them to run a workshop for 6 months, but in the 18th century they were permitted to continue indefinitely, provided they did not marry outside the guild. Other regulations refer to master craftsmen and women who left the city, and to apprentices who changed masters without authorization. So here it is not clear, as in other cases there is a fundamental ambiguity, and it is unclear who these maestre, these masters are. Master craftswomen in their own right, or widow of masters. Or might the two overlap, maybe, such that a widow who continues the workshop's work is a master craftswoman in her own right. An 18th century regulation specified that wives, daughters, sisters, sisters-in-law, nieces, and blood-related cousins may work in the home and workshop of the master craftsman, but also of any other master craftsman, provided they remain women of the trade and do not marry persons of a different profession. So at this point, we can think that, as with silk weaving, it was not straightforward to determine who was truly part of a family of mirror makers and therefore had the right to work. However, there is currently no evidence of a census similar to that of the silk weavers in 1753. Then, about female apprenticeship masters, the Garzoni database contains more than 54,000 apprenticeship agreements recorded over an 87-year period between 1575 and 1772 at the Giustizia Vecchia. Of these, 594 were entered into with a female master, and 777 with a female apprentice. So according to specific chronology, here you can see the female and male apprentices. So the chronological groups correspond to the years, to the time periods. So overall, as you understand, contracts involving female masters and female apprentices account for just over 1% of the total. So the clauses are fairly uniform, but in contracts for masters, it is more often the case that the apprentice of their family pays the master rather than the other way around. So it's more frequent that the apprentice pays the master. So very often if there is no exchange of money, or if apprentices pay their masters, these are artistic or scientific professions, mainly, which are almost always the preserve of men. (9,394) contracts concern female masters taking on male apprentices across a wide variety of trades. The most common trades among female masters are the so-called gucciadore and specchiere, so mirror makers. These are followed by cloth weavers, trimming weavers, and seamstresses. These are all, no statutes are available for gucciadori, which was a trade integrated in the haberdashers corporation. So the gucciadori female gucciadore, often married women, took on very young male and female apprentices who almost never lived in the master's home. So again, these women, female masters were married sometimes, but not always. So here we are in 1647, and it states again very clearly that women could run the business. This is a specific example about Cecilia, for example, the widow of Zorzi Vidali. So she ran the mirror maker's workshop from 1647 to 1670, taking on a male apprentice every 4 or 5 years. So the last contract available was drawn up by her son, but in his mother's name. So there's a whole research we are carrying on the definitions on the names used, because Cecilia del Fu could be the daughter or the widow of the man running the business. So many other trades are represented among the female masters. So these are all the trades I could find where women were present. So here you can see that the textile trades are the most relevant ones, but we have also sectors for for personal production, products, medicines, and many other. We have also women fishmongers, women fisher. But the question at this point is, are these trades in which women can grow and proceed? Who are these female masters? So are these trades in which women could pursue a guild career and obtain the title of master or headmaster? Who are these masters? In short, the question may have various answers, not least because, as we have seen, the statutes of the guilds are not always explicit and precise regarding the gender of their members, and the sporadic yet repeated presence of regulation concerning maestre, so female masters, and even capomaestre, leads us to believe that these women were indeed such. So the sources we have consulted for Venice open up new perspective, but do not yield consistent results. Moreover, this is a line of research that must be continued, extended, as I was saying, extended it to the statutes of other trades. Now I leave the floor to my colleague. So as you have understood, in Florence and maybe even more in Venice, women could assume specific, well-defined professional roles and identities: master craftswomen, head craftswomen, apprentices and workers, roles that were not limited to the widow of master craftsmen, nor tied to family roles. So the question concerning the Franco Franceschi's article, have we perhaps identified other so-called paradises for female workers? However, in some cases, the work of women in the master craftsman family emerges clearly from the statutes, especially in Venice, where the current stage of research references to the presence of women appear to be more numerous. So the sources used so far, censuses, statutes, registers of masters and mistresses, apprenticeship contracts, do not allow us to highlight conflicts and therefore any actions or claims by female workers. This research is still ongoing, is still on process, is still to be carried out, actually. So certainly this initial research confirms, as far as the legislation is concerned, the formula coined by Angela Groppi of the accordion movement. So the guilds opened or closed their doors to women depending on economic conditions. But it is not possible to speak of a general trend towards exclusion in the modern era. But as we have observed, we think these documents highlight that the reality was not so clear and rigid, but quite blurred. So we have several different situations.
Corine.
Thank you, Anna and Corine, for your speech. Very interesting. It invites us to go beyond too rigid readings and interpretations. So women are not exclusively included or excluded, but they are also influenced. Their presence is influenced by very practical and formal and informal factors and conditions. Now we have Isabel Drumond Braga, with her speech about gender and food-related trade associations in Portugal between the 16th and 18th century.
Female labor played a significant role in activities related to textiles and production, sale. Years, I have developed the research aimed at using the records of the Holy Office of the Inquisition to study work in Portugal during the early modern period. In this paper, our main goals are to verify the presence and role of women in food-related trades association, keeping in mind that food preparation was a task understood as a female prerogative. Analyze gender differences in relations to rights and duties in food corporations. Pay particular attention to the case of widows of men who carried out food activities, since if they did not remarry, in some cases, they could take over the business, although without being able to train apprentices. Understand how this difference evolved between the 16th and 18th centuries. To achieve these objectives, two types of sources will be used: office regulations on the 16th and 18th century and records of the Holy Office, in which the contrast between legislation and current practice can be seen. In Portugal, the first work regulations take place in the medieval period, but the vast majority of the trades related to the food activities did not have regulations, perhaps due to the lack of specialization that these trades require. During the early modern period, there was regulations in 1672 and in 1771. In 1672, we have 107 trades, and we only find 4 related to food activities: confectionaries, meat cutters, pastry chefs, and tavern keepers. In 1771, we have one more, the chocolate makers. In Portugal, women did not form part of corporations. However, as daughters or wives of artisans, they worked at home or in workshops. As widows, they could continue the activity of their deceased husbands, and in any of these situations, they were authorized to work autonomously and in their own right in trades not regulated by craft corporations. Essentially, this was a productive structure based on family particularity, true not exclusively in textiles and food production. Even in trades that did not involve female labor, the presence of multiple members of the same family was common. In regulated food-related trades, references to women's labors were scarce and repetitive. 16th century documents ignored women altogether, while 18th century regulations stipulated with regard to the widows of chocolate makers, confectionaries and pastry cooks that all those who wished to retain the shops left to them upon the death of their husbands would be authorized to do so for as long as they remained in that condition. They were not required to employ examined journeymen in their shops, with the exception of pastry cooks' widows, nor were they permitted to take on apprentices. Following the death of chocolate makers, confectionaries and pastry cooks, widows were required to request permission from the Senate of the Lisbon City Council in order to retain the shops. Should these women have sons of an age to manage the shops, they were required to undergo examination in order to obtain a craft license. In the case of the sons of the pastry cooks, if they were over the age of 18, the judges on the trade were to issue the license immediately. With regard to the trade of meat cutter, It functioned as a corporation, but was not corporation organized. In Portuguese, it means it's not embandeirado, and made no reference to women. Chocolate makers, confectionaries, pastry cooks, and tavern keepers were activities participed by both men and women, and apprenticeship could begin early, regardless of the fact that it was common to rely on the help of children for light tasks. Production was, in most cases, a family understanding involving either different members of the same group or external journeymen and apprentices. With regard to women's apprenticeship in food-related trades, the information found in the inquisitorial documentation is scarce. For some examples, Leonor Rodrigues, widow of Manuel Jorge and Simão de Fontes, stated that both of her brothers-in-law were confectionaries, as well as her two husbands. According to the testimony of her stepson, Diogo de Fontes, son of her second husband, he had acquired this trade within the house of both couples, and that his stepmother maintained the activity in Rua da Confeitaria, where both the dwelling and the shop were located. You can see the place, it's here, you can see it's the blue, and we will speak about this place some more times. The documentation gives us information about the practice of the trade. In Portugal, the early modern period, as in the medieval era, transformative activities were characterized by the coincidence of workshop and shop, meaning that each place of sale was simultaneously a small artisanal unit. Moreover, the location of shops of the ground floor and residential quarters on the upper floor was common across a wide range of trades. This documentation issues relating to shops emerge in several testimonies, confirming the coexistence of dwelling and shops within the same building, but there is some exception. For example, Rui Dias, a king's confectionery, described as a man of little judgment, a native and resident of Lisbon, who was accused by his wife of leaving in the morning, returning at night, and spending whatever he had on gambling and other things, while residing and working in Rua dos Confeiteiros, without further specification of the shops. By contrast, Gaspar Lopes, married to Violante Lopes, herself a confectionery, owned the shop in Arco dos Pregos in the Confeitaria Quarter, which was located on the low floor of the house, according to the testimony of Rodrigo de Quadros, in the house in the stairs where she has her shop. In the record of the confectionery, Messia Lopes, married to the confectioner Manuel Rodrigues, it can be read in the testimony of defendant's sister-in-law, Maria Rodrigues, that the two women had spoken about matters relating to the law of Moses, while both were alone because her husband was downstairs in the house where he had the confectionery shop. There were, however, exceptions to the usual arrangement of shop on the ground floor and dwelling on the upper floor. Inocência da Horta, wife of the confectionery, Álvaro Rodrigues, stated that she lived in Rua dos Douradores and had her shop in the confeitaria. Demonstrating the difficulties faced by those who had been penalized by the Holy Office, particularly in sustaining particular in sustaining themselves, the couple composed of the chocolate maker Baltasar Garcia and Josefa Rodrigues left Granada and Seville and settled in Portugal. Josefa explained to the Inquisition of Lisbon that she had come to Portugal 3 or 4 years ago because complaints had been made by shopkeepers of open stores that the reconciled sold everything at home, and she and her husband were greatly persecuted. She and her husband lived off some caramel they made for the summer and sold on the streets, and the husband made chocolate. They intend to return to Castile with her fathers-in-law. Inquisition trail records of confectionaries that contain the inventories of goods did not omit either tools of raw materials such as pumpkin, sugar, powdered sugar, and almonds. Among the confectionery already prepared, one finds pink sugar, preserves, confections of every kind, and specified sweets and quice paste. We can see a complete example here in the little preserve house, and you can find pumpkins, pears, and so on. Some of this documentation allows the knowledge of the goods, and you can see this is the complete list of a chocolate maker. He died, and his widow did the inventory of her goods. So you can see furniture, jewelry, tableware, religious image, shops, fittings, kitchen utensils, household textiles, and so on. That's the small portion of the kitchen utensil. It's a contrast, maybe contrast with furniture and so on. You can see this. This is not common in this kind of documentation, but it's very interesting when we can find this. The documentation provides us information about conflictuality. Shops were sites of sale, space of social interaction, dispute, and even professional negotiation. In the case of the old Christian Luís Mendes, he himself stated, "My shop was well known, and many people would gather there, both of the new and old Christian, where they dealt with matters concerning the election of judges and officials of the train, as well as other affairs." By contrast, the confectionery Violante, with a shop at Argo dos Pregos in the Confeitaria, declared during the cross-examination that her husband bore her will because they had quarrelled after he had received and given his mistress in the shop, to whom he gave everything. Other conflicts were about gambling. We can see here a statement about a problem with the two couples. One member of one of them said because they don't come back to the house because they played with the false cards, and it was a house of thieves. Other disputes include violence. We can see any cases. So, one involving men with a very broad sword with which greatly affronted and insulted, and it is presumed in an act of revenge, he falsely swore against her in order to harm her and her husband. And there's a conflict too involving weapons with a woman who hurts herself. According to a witness, and she inflicted 2 or 3 stabs on her chest at the time of her arrest, attempting to kill herself. Another testimony she had an infant at the breast, and therefore she would not fast at the church exempted her under these terms. This is not a conflict of work, but it's a problem because she will arrest it, so he tried to kill himself. Many main points. Food-related trades constitute privileged space of female participation, even though such involvement was largely rendered invisible by legal and corporative frameworks. Women emerge not merely as assistants or secondary figures, but as active economic agents responsible for production, retailing, and in many cases for the management of assets, particularly in context of widowhood. The conflicts identified among artisans within families and between fixed and itinerant forms of trade should be understood less as anomalies than as an integral feature of the function of these occupations. The cases examined expose tensions inherent to competition, limited social mobility, and the permeability between spaces of work and sociability, showing that the house, the shop, and the street functioned as overlapping areas of economic and symbolic negotiation. Within this framework, the sources produced by the Holy Office assume particular heuristic value by recording denunciations, contradictory testimonies, and inventories of goods. These materials provide access to dimensions of work and daily life that escape normative texts, revealing informal practices, power relations, networks of sociability, and conflicts silenced by corporative documentations. Rather than serving merely as ancillary evidence, inquisitorial records emerge as fundamental sources for reconstructing a social history of work that integrates gender, material culture, and lived experience. Thank you.
Grazie Isabel per il tuo contributo.
Thank you, Isabel, for your contribution. Well, here we see that real economy is much more flexible and inclusive than what norms would suggest. So women are actually essential protagonists of the urban economic life. Interesting. So we could now do a short 10 minutes break so that you can fill the forms if you want to pose questions, so that we will then, I think we will finish earlier, even though the bad weather does not help you to enjoy the afternoon. See you later in 10 minutes.
Cominciamo con...
Okay, let's get started with this debate now. So the first question by Japo to Corine and Anna.
Okay, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I'm always very impressed to see all the work that you in your various projects have been doing. So I think that there is no dispute that women worked. You convinced me of that. My question is perhaps whether it would be good to take the next step and ask a little bit, so was this a good thing for women or not? Because you might say, okay, great, they could work in crafts, but if working in crafts meant that women were underpaid, had little rights, were exploited, yeah, the question becomes, okay, what are we looking at? So what I would like to ask you is whether you have any sense as to whether women who manage to start a career in crafts had opportunities to actually advance, to improve their living standards, to improve the security of themselves and their families. And I guess that this is a bit related to Sarah Horrell, Jane Humphreys, and Jacob Weisdorf's recent publications about family standards of living. Ideally, having a career in crafts would have provided security for these families. So my question is, can you tell us a bit more about whether these occupations of women were keeping them down or were opening new perspectives and opportunities for them? Thank you.
Mathieu Marot per Corine e Anna.
Corine e Anna. Thank you, all of you. So, from the French situation where crafts guilds are very, very male-oriented, just to remain on the statutes. So the appearance of a member, so by a marriage, so entering in a guild because they were married to one man, being member of the guild. This was very common. So the work is structured in a way through this affiliation, heritage, marriage. So allows men to enter the guild since they are getting married to, the daughter of a previous member of the guild, a male. And then the second issue is the propriety of raw materials and machines. So when the woman enters into the guild, so the owner of the raw materials and machines is the woman. So for women, women are expressing themselves with a great deal of strength in men's run guilds. Renzo Sabatini for Corine and Anna. So I'm very much fascinated by chocolate for reasons of personal consumption, like chocolate. I'm a chocolate eater. So for this beautiful work, but not new, made by Anna and Corine, I have no questions because, right? Because I wanted to say explicitly that I'm less optimistic than the look of visions provided by Franco. I was just saying this a while before this because the difference of 3 looms which can be used by men, and 2 looms which can be run by women. So this difference is not that secondary or less important, or the least important issue. Second point, which is not a sort of comparison between men and women at the same level. So in the great merchants' shops, having 20, 30 weavers and all the rest, and other laborers just working on the loom, they are all men, these laborers, these workers. And another point, in the silk making factory in Lucca, showing a real difference between males and females. So these revolt of the beggars in 1531. So I've been studying these so long. So, but the presence of female weavers is almost inexisting. 2 centuries after this, when the art of silk is in crisis, very beginning of the mean 18th century, 1711, 12, was something very interesting, because the art managers, in a way, they adopt the same very political system of the discolato. That's very interesting. They just distributing a full set of policies, cards, anonymous cards, for revealing, you know, all the possible flaws, defects of the art of silk. And this is an important, connotation. So the relationship male-female weavers is 1, 2, 3 in the distribution of policies, but the ones being given back, they do not correspond to this. Above all, we speak of the male policies for men, you know, and as you know, and then we have these usual stuff, as anyone knows quite well. So feminization of the loom has been considered in Lucca as one of the main root causes of the shrinkage of quality of drapery for physical reasons of strength, in moving the loom, in moving the spinning loom for weaving the fabric, the cloth. So we have to be a bit cautious in this heaven on earth. Thank you.
Thomas Ertl.
Thomas Ertl for Corine and Anna.
For all of you, it's a term which has been important in German historical research on the role of women in the labor market, and that is the working couple, la coppia che lavora insieme. And I was wondering if this is an important issue for you too. For instance, does a mistress become a mistress after the death of the husband master, for instance? And secondly, what does this mean for the ratio of women working? Because if there are working couples too hiding an official role of women in the working process, the number of women being part of the labor market would be even higher than what you told us, because there are many women working alongside their spouses and not being part of your statistics here. So it would increase even more the role of women in the labor market. And still, I was a little bit struck by the prominence of women in the labor market in these cities. Would you say that this is valid for Europe in general, or is this a particular case for these textile industrial cities of the Italian peninsula?
Tamara Herzig per Anna.
For Anna, Tamara Herzig for Anna.
to thank all three of you for this, well, first of all, for making visible women's contribution to the workforce, which is always still presumed to have been a marginal aspect or little known phenomenon. So thank you. These are incredible works. And I have a question to Anna especially. You mentioned the involvement of an even more marginal category within the women category, that of servants who were involved, who were helping in the workshops, in the production. And so, of course, I wanted to ask about the involvement of enslaved women, because we know that in some Spanish areas, for instance, enslaved women were working in the crafts, but they were not guild members. So, do we know anything about, in Italy, about their work, or, yeah, or the differences between, sometimes they are referred to in the sources as serva, but then it is serva and not famula, and sometimes the use of serva could actually, rather than massara, could indicate a freed slave or a slave. So just I would be interested in hearing about that. Thank you.
Wendy Hop, sempre per Anna.
Wendy Hop for Anna. Thank you very much for this very encouraging session, very interesting. With my research, I have to ask you something about the velvet makers in Venice. So, I would like to ask you a clarification, if there is anything to share specific on the offices and duties of women within the framework of a shop, of a workshop. Weaving is an occupation, labor-intensive, time-consuming. In my research, I've been looking at Ramazzini, which was quite worried about this. And he said weaving, spinning also can cause some indigestion sometimes. And also, I mean, I'm a child mischarge. So I want to know if in the sources you find something to be more specific to this extent. So weaver, master weavers, female master weavers, or we speak of something else, warping also, so velvet, I mean, so printed, I mean, I don't know, weaving. So in your source, did you find something about this point? Thank you. Last but not least, for Anna and Corine, Franco Franceschi. Okay, that's a small question, some small remarks. Out of your amazing presentations, communication, of course, we have to start from statutes. So we cannot pretend they do not exist. We cannot ignore statutes. Of course, we have additional sources, but I want to say this. So the Statutes of the Art of War 317, which is the only published so far, the first one published so far, existing one, published, so the only publish of a full set of statutes that came even later, 361, so 1428. And also that's a statutes which is not very well, I mean, presented, not just for women, also for men, not for all men. All the crafts have been fully listed, in the statutes. Just making up this great, manufacturing work or workshop. So it's very meaningful because in addition to weavers, spinners, female, also we have female comers, coming. So wool coming is the primary phase, which is made by salaried, workers by this so-called chompe. So it sounds quite strange in a way, weird. But I've checked this out just a minute before 2 or 3 minutes. So in Mariegola of the Arte della Lana in Venice, which is not in the list, in the official list, ready to use, but this has been published, of course. So we have, in addition to weavers, female weavers, and other business chain, so poor, we say they are poor. So I want just to throw a stone for something we're going to tackle in a few years. Also, we have commerce, but also beaters, those beating wool. So crafts of this kind, a sort of. These are very, very unskilled crafts before spinning. But so this is on the first half of the 14th century. The Mariegola is quite interesting also as a chronological approach, going from the second half of the 200 up to the end of the 500, 13th century, 16th century. Is a lot of stuff to tackle, isn't it? But in a phase which is less specialized, also for Venice, of course, where the development of wool making appears in the late 15th century. Maybe these crafts were also, how to say, so not on an industrial scale, so maybe, and there was not yet that configuration needed of small family-run workshops, also with some time with 5-10 workers. So, I mean, these are crafts that later on are not made by women, but also many other crafts made by women, as we have seen. So, for the theme of female masters, very interesting. So these definitions also are always very interesting. That's a very pertaining qualification, rewarding women having some specialties. So for women, flash in my mind now that those pulling the silk, I mean the thread out of the silk cocoon, very beautiful to see. Not for the butterfly inside the cocoon, but just for pulling the thread out of the cocoon. They put their hands into boiling water and they extract the thread out of the cocoon. Think of their hands. So in their Florence sources, occupational diseases of that epoch. So in the Florentine sources, so they're always defined as female master crafts. So even though, or mistresses, but so it's not true because if the thread breaks, so that's a big problem. Everything stops. So that's very important. And with these mistresses of female masters up to the 16th century and even beyond that century, I'm referring to compartments of our specialties. Also, those putting the silk on tubes are just defined as businesses, and also the so-called gold spinners just putting the golden thread around some silk, threads as well. And we have very interesting studies in nunneries also. So the craft of putting silk on the cane was considered as a profession very, very suitable to those who had, in a way, leave out of their work. The Innocenti Hospital in Florence, very often they sent these girls as apprentices to this hospital for this kind of specialization, a specialty for silk. I thought I said everything that flashed in my mind. I don't want to polemical with Renzo. I didn't send him the paper, but when I read the paper again, I see the title was rhetorical, to be attractive to crowds. The reading of this paper, but the conclusions are slightly different, because this issue of the amount of looms has been very well duly faced. Why? Also, the other one, since if a woman marries someone not being a weaver, is going to be penalized. We don't know as to the amount of looms given, and also the chance of hiring some apprentices after training them all. But still, the point is that in Italy, in the medieval Italian regions, example of mixed guilds, that studied. No way to find one, sorry. Mixed guild. Sorry, I make an apology. I didn't ask anything, but I've been given some answers by myself to issues raised by myself as well. Maria Paola Zana Bonti, so remotely connected. Can we get the connection?
Sì, ci provo, mi sentite? Buongiorno. No,
Can you hear me? Good afternoon to everybody.
Sì, riuscite? Sì, mi sentite? Ah,
Yes,
ok,
we
perfetto,
can
grazie.
hear you.
Buongiorno a tutti.
So,
Ecco, io avevo niente, qualche osservazione, nel senso alcuni punti che da quello che ho potuto vedere per il Medioevo mi combaciano con quanto detto da Corine e Anna Bellavitis. In particolar modo sulle donne invisibili, sulla questione dell'inclusione e non esclusione e sui salari. Allora, per quanto riguarda le donne invisibili, per gli statuti che ho potuto vedere io, che vanno più o meno dal 300, 400, 500, le donne sono di solito soltanto accennate, si parla di quibelque, illo, velilla, pur, puella, a meno che non si comportino male. Per esempio, negli statuti dei filatori di Milano, 1479-1511, c'è una serie di norme contro le filatrici e incannatrici che rubano, quindi devono essere sottomessi all'arte, ci deve essere un albo, nessuno deve dare più loro lavoro. Poi ancora a Milano nel 1497 i merciai si costituiscono in corporazione e dicono testualmente: tanto lo sappiamo che il lavoro dei veri è fatto dalle donne e lo fanno tutte in nero. D'ora in poi se vogliono lavorare devono iscriversi con la fonte notarile e con le matricole delle arti, e si è resa conto, ha confermato che anche quando le donne non sono mai citate negli statuti, però magari appaiono come iscritte alla matricola, oppure appaiono nel contratto di apprendistato, soprattutto iscritte alla matricola.
Guilds and in contracts. So it seems that at least in the Middle Ages, the women's presence is like taken for granted somehow. So they are more specifically mentioned when they are to be punished or fined. So I would say that it seems that guilds and corporations do not want to exclude women actually, but rather that they are aware of their unofficial work, illegal work. So again, they are not mentioned, they are not taken into account expressively, with the exception of cases in which they have to be punished. This is true in the health sector, and also, again, in sectors which are mainly in the hands of women. In Wales, for example. So they are not, again, excluding women. They try to oblige them to register, to pay taxes, and to practice the business, so to work respecting all the standards. So all these aspects are expressed in the statutes back to the 14th century in Florence of the Bakers Guild. So it is expressly said which are the duties of the members of the guild. So it is said that also women, if they want to work, they have to register, they have to do an apprenticeship. Also for nighttime work, for example, they have to pay taxes, they have to also to demonstrate that they carry out the activity properly. We can also see it in the statutes of olive oil producers in Florence. There it is expressed what the corporation thinks about the women. So women have to be accountable, to be held accountable, not to create debts, etc., and so forth. So we have several examples. So women can work. But again, they need to register, and in other cases, they have to be they are subject to examinations. There are specific groups to be registered in the physics. Physician registry, for example, and do an examination, a specific examination, and in the curia. We have other examples also in Spain in mid-15th century. There women get licenses following to specific studies. So, and the group of physicians, it is said that only those who have passed the exam can practice the business. Then we have other activities about precious products, for example, coral products. In embroiders, we have several guilds in Venice, for example, which are then like standardized and they get a regulation. So as far as I could understand from several documents, it seems that women want to stay out of it, also because they are more competitive this way and they do not have to pay taxes. So this is something coming from a source of the 18th century. The button makers of Turin. Also because we can notice from the documentation that their activity started before the formation of the guild, the settlement of the guild. So in the Middle Ages, we see that city authorities, they sent like overseers and controllers to find these workers home per home to let them pay taxes and to have them be registered. Also the so-called ferries. And there we also have disputes which were won. A dispute have been won by the workers and also against the employer, exploiting them, actually. Then we have another important example in England of
Anche in questo caso,
brewers, beer makers. There as well we have examples of women who do not want to register and they are obliged to do that. So it seems that their approach or their preference is not to register and to remain independent and free. My third point on which I agree is that on wages. Also in the Middle Ages, as far as I could understand, We do not have actually gender issues about wages, but the difference is related to the ability to work. So where women were working as well as men, so could sell as much as men, they were paid the same. They had similar wages. This is in 1201, sorry. In 1321, we have also documents about prices and wages showing this equality. In Padua, in 16th century, again, we have other examples of equal wages. In Florence, the company of Andrea Banchi of knitwear. Here again, we have data about equal wages. Of course, this is not the same elsewhere, where women are preferred over women. But again, it is not, also here, it is not a gender-based issue, but this is due to other different causes and factors. Sorry, the connection is quite bad. Thank you. Thank you for your remarks. I'm leaving the floor to Corine and Anna, so that they can reply to your remarks. They can give a feedback to your remarks, and then we'll go on with Isabel. Well, I would like to thank Maria Paola Zanaboni for all your remarks, so very detailed, mentioning also your researches and your books, the books she has published. I don't know, maybe your vision is a bit too optimistic. We could discuss about it. But, well, I'll start from the beginning. So, Jaco, I'm going to talk in Italian. Well, this is a great topic, if they are able to start a career or not. What does it mean? So to have a financial autonomy is better than not, of course. So this is the first step, a first comment, so to say. Then, well, that is it is pretty paradox, because we see women working in quarries or in construction sites, transporting stones. Well, that's good on the one side, but maybe they would prefer to stay at home. They would have preferred to stay at home, because it's a very, very heavy work. Do you want to add something? Well, yes. Well, of course, the same is applicable to men, So we have to take into consideration that labor is not only about men, but also it's men and women. And we should consider it in all our researches and studies. We have to take into account the gender issues. So, yes, you said, let's do a step forward, but my reply to you is, okay, but let's do that for men as well. To you, Mathieu. Well, it is true that in France, this marriage, this thing of the marriage of widows is, yes, it's a crucial passage. So trying to get married to a widow to gain access to a business, so to be able to run a business, yes, this is true. This happens in Paris. On your other question, I have difficulty in replying to you about Florence, because I do not have a wide knowledge. Of course, women do not have, legal rights, juridical rights, so they have to act through their husbands. So we need to study this issue further and more in detail. So theoretically, it is not this way. Not always. That goes beyond the issue of corporations. This is an open point, in my opinion. This is an open question. So this situation exists in several European countries, in France and Spain and in Italy.
Bon, bref.
So women remain under control of their father until they marry, until they marry. So there's citizenship. There is citizenship through marriage. You can get citizenship through marriage. So this is a more complex situation, and also women pass on to their sons and daughters their rights and also the assets. So there is a kind of status in the silk industry in the 13th century, and it is said there that it is not possible
Allora, rispetto all'intervento di Renzo.
So, Sabatini, yes, right. Very often, I do believe that we have to bear in mind there is some competition on the labor market between men and women since ever. So it's not today. This happened even many centuries ago. There's a strongly run competition, a strong fight. And very often, women lose and men win. In the past, this was the case. Any step forward is going to be meaningful to me. So that's my being ignorant, but what seems to be very interesting looking at the status of the art of silk in the modern age, the ones I've been looking at. So women can be, it's not explained in the Florentine statutes, which the amount of looms the women can have. They can have more looms and making other people work in their shop. To be the head of a small workshop where many looms are run. Conversely, there is no different number, men versus women. This is not specifically shown in the document I got through, but was interesting also to make a comparison with this possibility and the Lyon situation, Lyon, France, where men, so during the revolution and the 19th century, men play a major role, a male figure in Lyon, even though we know we have a large amount of women working in this field, this sector, but so seems like that in Lyon, women cannot have personally looms and running looms as men do this. This was interesting. That's why it was necessary to me making this comparative study and to underpin this whilst reading Institutes of the Art of Silk, because as Franco said, we also have apprentices. So young men, young women in these workshops run by women.
Allora, sulla questione del working couple, certamente.
For the working couple, that's a theme coming from some historiography, German historiography, part of it. But this is found everywhere. So this is also found in statutes, the working couple. That's true, you're right, but as always, that's a work, not remunerated work. Also, the master is remunerated, but his wife, so is not remunerated since she's not statutes. The wife is not mentioned in censuses, apart from the Florentine case. So that's a theme which is a real one. We have a lot of studies done to this extent. And then we have some remuneration, in some recognition of this work in the late husband's will, testament, a recognition of this work not remunerate. This scenario is a bit partial. It's just about statutes, okay? But the European situation for women's work is very well diversified. Yes, of course, but at the same time, we have a lot of commonalities, much more than some economic historiography recently said, saying for some cases that women of the South, Italian South, didn't work because their fathers gave them a dowry. It's not true. They work a lot. Thank you, Maria Paola, for this indication, not just for the Middle Ages period, for the working couple. So this point is very interesting indeed, because, but I'm sorry for my poor Italian, just study census of 1767. What really struck me, so, I mean, in the enveloped that has been looked at, we cannot see because they separated parishes, couples. So we have no idea what a wife and her husband do. But you can also see a basic census of a San Lorenzo parish church, the largest in Florence. And these lists, you can see the work in the household, in the family, and very interesting. Very often, woman doesn't the same thing as her husband does. Look at the figures you can see in textile industry, women and the men in other crafts or in other sector, but not in the textile sector. This was just for women. So that's obvious that a woman and her husband do not do the same work. They do not have the same job. There is a distinct separation between the crafts, male-run crafts and women-run craft. And also we see also the continuation of the craft between the fathers and their offsprings. So mothers, so they give their job to their daughters, and fathers give their job to their sons. Thank you very much for your question, Tama. So I didn't find any expression making us think of slavery from the viewpoint of rules or statutes or apprenticeship contracts, but see the rule I mentioned on mirror makes mestiere, and then we have a lot of contracts of home service, so making the housekeeping, and also we have some artisanal work involved, also being just a house aide. Many things so very, very specialistic things, you know. As I said, I found some female slaves at the beginning of the 16th century in some Wales testaments. Some female slaves at the beginning of the 16th century. There is a law, Frank, you remember better, of Venetian weavers, silk weavers in the 14th century. Slaves, they said they cannot weave silk in Venice. So slaves were not entitled to weave silk in general, no distinction between men and women. I told you a nuisance. That's true. That's true that maybe before this law, in the art of the silk, we have the expression sklavos and sklava for work. So female and male slaves, before they're going to be excluded from silk spinning and weaving. That's 1351, more or less.
Tu non hai schiave. Allora, per quel...
Okay, for the velvet makers, veluteri, I don't know, but that's true. That's true. I was very much struck with these. Corine said this was the case in Florence. What I was thinking of women's work. So women's work in silk. three steps, warping, spinning, weaving, warping. So Camolari said this as well. The loom might provoke some child miscarriage, that's true, but they just set up the loom, so that's obvious. They can just lose their children, their child. So, but I have no additional indication to this issue, for this issue. Neither do I. And then we have Franca's question, which is for you. This was not a question, this was a comment. These were just general considerations. Thank you so much, because I'm going to use this consideration for the benefit of my research. I don't know things which have not been edited so far, thank you, but seems to be very interesting. This point, women can be called as female masters or mistresses in a way. And also the recognition of some know-how, a statute in a way, also social, background. That's very interesting. These female masters or mistresses, maestre, even though formally, so they do not have, the register number because they've not been registered. I didn't get enough time to elaborate this point anymore, so I didn't get enough time to look for additional sources. If women were mentioned in the apprentices and female masters or masters, just a few registers I saw for the 18th century and even before. The ones I got just a few years, just a bunch of women, just a few ones. So also in the official, registry number. So we see women might be accepted. That's something important to underpin. Well, I have a question to Isabel, which regards the production of the marmalade of quince, cotognato. When you start to see this quince marmalade, when you see quince marmalade in big quantities, this was a job just for women making quince marmalade. Do you have any news where this quince marmalade was produced? This was something which was sold in large quantities. I saw this quince marmalade on boats from Andalusia sailing to the Americas. Large quantity of this quince marmalade, Mendrillo. Can you speak French? Women preparing this quince marmalade, this quince confection. Women at their homes. We have no additional information on this craft. In Portugal, we have some information on the jars of this marmalade. The jar just to put the quince marmalade inside. And that is done by man. That's a work which is made in some special workshop, a jar making workshop. But cakes and confections are always done by women in Portugal. Good. That's the end of this session. Thank you very much for joining us, for being present till the end of this session. Presentation just two, but we gave enough space for Q&A session, and we gave enough space for women's work. Thank you. See you tomorrow.